let me present you Linda Greene. Can you hear me? Yes, it's fine. Linda Greene is a professor at the University of Wisconsin Law School, the former Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the University of California at San Diego, and in her conference entitled The Empowerment of Women Faculty in the University, Strategic, Cultural, and Structural Approaches to Institutional Transformation, Linda will demonstrate that efforts to increase the number of women who qualify to compete for academic positions is a necessary but insufficient strategy, and that the gender transformation of the university requires academic, institutional, and governmental initiatives. So Linda, the floor is yours.
Thank you. What a pleasure to be here in Toulouse again. In this talk, I'm going to share with you my views on the empowerment of women in the university. My perspective is based upon my legal background as a civil and constitutional rights lawyer since 1974, as a professor of constitutional and civil rights law since 1978, as a university faculty leader at my institution and nationwide since 1989, my 5 years as Associate Vice Chancellor of Academic Affairs at the University of Wisconsin, and my recent experience as Vice Chancellor of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the University of California, San Diego. As a result of these experiences, I conclude that the empowerment of women faculty in the university requires much more than a statement of non-discrimination against women. It requires a clear and unambiguous commitment to the creation of a university that is open to women at every level. It requires the adoption of a strategic framework for the inclusion of women, the cultural transformation of the university to create a positive climate for success of women in the university, and structural and programmatic changes that ensure goal setting, monitoring, and accountability for progress in the empowerment of women at the university. Let me begin with the United States legal framework. I would like to share with you the domestic legal framework that sets the stage for an obligation to reject discrimination against women in the university. That legal framework rests on both constitutional decisions and statutory enactments. As to the constitutional decisions, the United States Supreme Court embraced the constitutional legitimacy of discrimination against women until the early 1970s. In the early 1970s, the Supreme Court began to consider whether courts should be skeptical of the legality of gender-based classifications. Finally, in 1976, the Supreme Court decided that courts should not defer to governmental decisions to treat women differently based on gender. Rather, the Supreme Court required courts to examine classifications based on gender to determine whether they served important governmental interests and were substantially related to the achievement of those interests. As a result, thereafter, courts declared that most, but not all, governmental classifications based on gender were unconstitutional. It's important to note that these constitutional decisions only apply to government classifications based on gender, not decisions in the private sector. The United States Congress enacted two important pieces of legislation that provide protection to women against employment discrimination, and both are important in the context of university employment. One is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Title VII prohibits discrimination in employment by private or public employers on the basis of race, color, national origin, and sex. Title VII is enforced by private litigants in court, by a National Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and by the Department of Justice in limited circumstances. A second enactment is Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex in any institution receiving federal financial assistance to education. Women may sue in court to enforce Title IX, and the Department of Education monitors compliance with the requirement of non-discrimination and also investigates individual complaints of discrimination. Both of these legislative enactments have been important to the transformation of the workplace, and I do not want to minimize their importance in the context of women in a university. However, universities resisted the application of these legal mandates to decisions about the qualifications of women and minorities to teach. Universities resisted the application of these mandates to their eligibility for promotion and advancement in the academic ranks. Few universities were proactive in their outreach to women and minorities as a result of these legislative measures. When women did sue in court and claim gender discrimination in hiring or in promotion, universities routinely dismissed the merits of these claims. University lawyers argued that faculty decisions about whether to hire women or whether to promote women were entitled to secrecy. They also argued that in any event, courts had no business second-guessing the decisions of university faculty. Some women sued, but most women were deterred and intimidated by this aggressive defense posture. Thus, the mere existence of legal mandates was insufficient for the transformation of the role of women in the university. In order to make the case that the abandonment of discrimination against women was important, researchers developed a growing body of research that now documents the importance of diverse faculty at a university, and it is to that research I turn next. For the interpreters, a signal. I will next address the research that demonstrates the difference that diversity makes in the quality of the university. In the university, faculty leaders demanded to be persuaded that diversity matters. They might ask, what difference does it make if we have women faculty? What difference does it make if we have blacks and other minorities on the faculty? Knowledge is knowledge, isn't it? What difference could it possibly make who creates it, who teaches it, who participates in the intellectual enterprise that is the contemporary university? The research of Professor Darrell Smith of the Claremont Graduate University addresses this indifference to the gender and race of those who participate in the intellectual enterprise of the contemporary university. In her book, Diversity's Promise for Higher Education, Professor Smith emphasizes the critical role that diversity plays in the fundamental legitimacy of the university. She maintains that the diversity of people in a university is the most critical indicator of institutional equity and inclusion. Correlatively, the absence of diversity sends a powerful message about institutional preferences. Moreover, the absence of diversity increases the scrutiny and the importance of each hiring decision, leading to a hypersensitivity to any appointment that disrupts the status quo. On the other hand, Professor Smith's research shows that increased diversity increases the trust that diverse communities have in both decision makers and their decisions. Thus, increased diversity provides institutional legitimacy for the university. Professor Smith also concluded that diversity plays an instrumental role. Diverse identities bring access to new networks and new communities. In other words, increased diversity provides an institution with social capital. Social capital is defined as the network of social connections that exist between people and their shared values and norms of behavior which enable and encourage mutually advantageous social cooperation. A great example is this conference, which features women as prime actors and also attracts people who are interested in the topic and in the networks that these people possess. Here, over the past 2 days, we have had access to a plethora of networks. Students, politicians, activists, diplomats, deans, faculty, interpreters, artists, men. The social capital we have experienced is immense. I cite our experience here in the last 2 days to illustrate what is meant by the increased social capital that diversity provides. Diversity also makes institutions more attractive to minorities and women by minimizing the effects of tokenism, the phenomena associated with groups that are completely dominated by men. Here, I depart from Professor Smith's work to quote from my own 1990 article, Tokens, Role Models, and Pedagogical Politics. I quote, Rosabeth Moss Cantor argues that tokens and tokenism are prevalent in skewed groups, groups which are dominated by one type of individual. These groups control the institution's culture. Those outside the dominant groups are tokens. 3 perceptual tendencies reinforce tokenism: visibility, contrast, and assimilation. The visibility phenomenon is self-explanatory. Tokens are highly visible because their physical features set them apart from the dominants. Contrast, the second perceptual tendency, results when dominant group members exaggerate the differences between themselves and the token as a defensive measure to maintain and guarantee their commonalities. Assimilation is the increased use by the dominant group of generalizations with respect to the token individual. In effect, the dominant group distorts its perception of the token individual in order to maintain the stereotypical generalizations it holds as to the token group. The assimilation phenomenon ensures that the token's true characteristics are dominated and overshadowed by those stereotypes which are believed to identify the group to which the token belongs. The result of these phenomena is that the token is highly visible, yet not perceived as an individual. The dominant group merges her true individual characteristics with the stereotypes it applies to her group. Because the token is highly visible, she bears more performance pressure than members of the dominant group. I continued this 1990 article on a more personal note to describe the experiences of African American female law professors, extremely scarce until the last 15 years. Our participation is profoundly political and disturbing to many. Our scattered presence draws the attention of students and faculty alike to a past in which we were completely absent and to a present in which we are virtually absent. Our limited presence visually politicizes the past and present by reminding students, faculty, alumni, and others of the inferiority rationales for our historic and current exclusion. Our demand to profess, to authoritatively declare and critique society's norms is at odds with our historical roles and status. Until the moment of our appointment, faculty members wring their hands and commiserate for attribution about the difficulties of the search process, the lack of qualified applicants, and the limited pool. Immediately after our appointments, often in press releases, faculties publicly announce our appointments and remind each other how lucky we are to have her. The ubiquitous white male professor arouses no curiosity or attention based solely upon his presence. Yet we are the object of curiosity and scrutiny whenever we are present, and the subject of rationalizing explanations when we are not. In this context, the occasional African American female law professor becomes less an individual and more a symbol or a sign with ambiguous meaning. The dynamics of tokenism profoundly affect the experiences of the lone woman as she navigates the tricky and rough landscape of the token professor. Professor Smith's point is that the presence of more women and more minorities changes the experience of both the dominant and the non-dominant group. My point has been that tokenism is not equality. It is a new form of discrimination against women and minorities. I turn next to the remarks of a very prominent scientist and a woman I had the pleasure to work with closely for over a decade on the empowerment of women faculty at Wisconsin. Her name is Professor Jo Handelsman, formerly of Wisconsin, now at Yale. In addition to her prominent work in the area of plant pathology, she is also a leading scholar on the benefits of diversity. Her research demonstrated that diversity benefited both teaching and research. Diverse groups generated more feasible and effective ideas. She also found that groups exposed to minority viewpoints generated more critical analyses and alternatives than groups that were homogeneous. Diversity also benefited students. Specifically, she concluded that policies fostering diversity had positive effects on student cognitive development, student satisfaction with college experience, and the development of student leadership abilities. Finally, I share with you the work of Professor Scott E. Page from the University of Michigan, who has focused on the benefits of cognitive diversity. His influential book, The Difference: How the Power of Diversity Creates Greater Groups, Firms, Schools, and Society, has provoked new conversations about the importance of diversity in general, as well as the importance of gender and race diversity. Professor Page studied the performance of diverse and non-diverse teams and concluded that diverse teams possess the cognitive diversity that permits them to outperform homogeneous teams. Professor Page also explores just what produces cognitive diversity that explains these results. He concluded that many factors influence our intellectual propensities and our intellectual styles. Our training influences our interpretation of phenomena and events. I'll elaborate briefly on this point. We process events differently depending on our intellectual traditions and exposures. For example, lawyers see phenomena differently than sociologists, than psychologists, than historians, than philosophers, than poets, than artists, than physicists, than mathematicians, than humanities scholars, than engineers, than physicists. Moreover, Professor Page explains that our objective and constructive characteristics shape our identities and create our cultures. We are shaped by our gender, race, physical ability, sexual orientation, religion, as examples. All of these factors play a role in our identity formation. In turn, identity formation shapes the manner in which we see the world and navigate the world. For example, a wheelchair-bound person sees the barriers to access that a non-wheelchair-bound person would overlook. Page emphasizes that culture shapes identity. Each of us has a culture. We have our stories that help us make sense of the world. We have our own analogies, our unique brains, and our success strategies. All of our experience, our culture, our identity, creates our unique cognitive tools, our interpretation approaches, our predictive models, our thinking, and our strategies. How does gender fit in? Gender matters. Women treat and react to men and women differently, and as a result, men and women have different experiences, and men and women learn to think about situations differently. Page posits that identity matters, but not in the flat and stereotypical way that most people think. It's not about an essentialist view of how women think, or how men think, or how black women think, or how black men think. To quote Professor Page, it's all about your well. Few people even know what a well is these days, but that is where many people in the world get their water. The contrast would be between a deep well with an abundant supply of water connected to a deep aquifer, and a shallow well which may dry up. Your deep well is what sustains you. It includes your identity, your experience, your problem-solving tools. Professor Page says then that it is not race or gender per se, but rather those different wells of experience that you draw on when it's time to solve problems, design curricula, teach classes, structure and pursue research, or embark on creative projects. I've taken some time to lay a foundation for the importance of a gender-diverse academy because despite moral, legal, and ethical bases for the inclusion of women, it remains important to talk about why women make a difference in the quality of the intellectual enterprise. What does an institution do after its leaders decide to embrace women as intellectual colleagues? The next step is clear and unequivocal communication about the importance of equity and diversity. When an institution is in the early stages of its transformation from an institution that is indifferent to gender or racial diversity, or one that is content with tokenism, its messaging about equality and diversity is weak and ineffective. Leaders will not address the issue of exclusion at all, or they do so with comments like these. Well, of course we're looking for qualified women. We don't want to hire an unqualified woman. We don't know why we don't have any women. I resent the idea that men have these positions because we discriminated against women. I have close colleagues who are women. Research demonstrates that success in the diversification of institutions begins with clear communication from the highest leaders about the importance of diversity to the institution. Moreover, when certain institutions make the jump to light speed, here I draw on the famous Luke Skywalker command, there's always a leader who has decided to state that business as usual is no longer an option and that diversity is an institutional imperative. Those leaders speak much in substance and in tone, like the former president of Spain, José Luis Zapatero, did here yesterday and the day before. They are as clear as a bell. The message, the time for equivocation about the role of women and minorities in the university has expired. I want to share with you some examples of strong and unequivocal statements. Here are two from Stanford University in California. In 2007, John Ekmendy, the provost of Stanford University, said that it was time for a change in the way the university recruits its talent. Quote, "The tried and true methods of recruiting, hiring, and retaining well-qualified and diverse faculty members have not been enough. We must take a new, more vigorous approach to fostering diversity if we are to stay at the forefront of knowledge, creativity, and public service." The president of Stanford University made a similar statement as he announced a commitment of over $30 million to the recruitment of women and minorities to the faculty. Quote, "This commitment is based first and foremost on the belief that a more diverse faculty enhances the breadth, depth, and quality of our research and teaching by increasing the variety of experiences, perspectives, and scholarly interests among the faculty." The statements from leaders at the University of Michigan are also instructive. President Mary Sue Coleman of the University of Michigan said, quote, "Diversity is integral to Michigan's academic excellence. When you bring together students, faculty, and staff of different backgrounds and different experiences, you create an intellectual experience that is unmatched in higher education. Dr. Lester Montz, the Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs of the University of Michigan, echoed the remarks of his president. We encourage life-changing moments by expecting excellence in everything we do. A diverse cohort of people and perspectives is key to catalyzing such excellence. The university as a whole does better when students, faculty, and staff with diverse backgrounds work and learn together. Finally, here is the very strong statement from leaders at Johns Hopkins University. The provost of the university, Lloyd Minor, said in 2010, "Our consciousness needs to move in all areas of diversity and inclusiveness. I believe and I hope that we are in the process of moving from pursuing diversity simply as a moral imperative to a deeper understanding. We need to get to the place where diversity is an acknowledged prerequisite for excellence." Diversity was once feared to subvert excellence. But when we stop and use our common sense, we recognize that diversity is a necessity for excellence. It is in diversity that we found the foundation of innovation, discovery, and the creation of knowledge. The pursuit of truth is fundamentally an exploration of competing claims and complementary ideas. To shut out alternative viewpoints is to limit possibilities for greater understanding. And one more statement from Johns Hopkins Health System. Johns Hopkins is a community committed to sharing values of diversity and inclusion in order to achieve and sustain excellence. We firmly believe that we can best promote excellence by recruiting and retaining a diverse group of students, faculty, and staff, and by creating a climate of respect that is supportive of their success. This climate for diversity, inclusion, and excellence is critical to attaining the best research, scholarship, teaching, healthcare, and other strategic goals of the health system and the university. All of these statements are clear about 3 points. 1, they are clear about the relationship between the depth of knowledge we create and the people who participate in the creation of that knowledge. They are clear about the proposition that diversity is an opportunity to expand knowledge. They also embrace the idea that faculty diversity is necessary to the effective education of students for success in the 21st century. Next, I want to turn to the importance of a strategic framework for the inclusion of women. What is a strategic framework for the inclusion of women? We might well imagine that we could pursue the inclusion of women on our faculties in several ways. We could pursue it simply by announcing we are now committed to the inclusion of women in the university and then go back to doing our business as usual. That would be one approach. One might wait for the processes and structures that have produced a predominantly male faculty to suddenly begin to produce women candidates, women chairs of departments, women deans, women vice chancellors, and women chancellors or presidents. However, whenever any institution is committed to achieving any objective that it has determined is integral to its future success and competitiveness, it sets out to name, that objective so that the leadership knows what is expected. It collects data on its current status. It sets goals for change. And it also sets aside funding and people to ensure success. I would like to share some of my experiences in institutional transformation at the University of Wisconsin. My university, one of the top universities in the world, ranked third in research expenditures in the United States, with 43,000 students, 21,000 faculty and staff, and a budget of $2.8 billion. At the University of Wisconsin, Donna Shalala, the first woman chancellor who served from 1988 to 1993, championed a strategic planning effort that included a strategic goal to increase the number of women and minority faculty at the University of Wisconsin. She asked the analytical unit of the university to develop detailed information on the historical and current hiring, tenure, and promotion of women. Not only on the outcomes of those processes, but also on the time to tenure, to determine whether there were disparities between men and women in these areas. She urged all faculties and departments to proactively recruit minorities and women. And she promised to provide financial assistance for those faculty appointments. She also promised funding to support dual career academic couples so that Wisconsin could be successful in the recruitment of both spouses or both partners in the event that the couple was unmarried. She also assigned her provost, the number 2 person at the university, to oversee this strategic hiring program. That program was formalized and eventually included funding for minority postdoctoral fellows, minority faculty, women faculty in the sciences and engineering and mathematics, and dual career couples. When I was Associate Vice Chancellor from 1999 to 2004, I administered these strategic hiring programs and negotiated funding arrangements involving $11 million of contributions from the Central Campus to faculty hiring. Chancellor Shalala, encouraged by a committee on women in the university that monitored the status of women at the university and made proposals for policy and programmatic change, commissioned a statistical analysis of male and female faculty salaries. That analysis concluded that salary and inequity existed campus-wide. She ordered an increase in women's salaries across the campus and committed to a reanalysis of salary and equity at periodic intervals. Chancellor Shalala left the university in 1992 to serve as a cabinet secretary in the administration of President Clinton, but her successors continued their commitment to strategic, structural, and cultural change. In the course of strategic planning, the university recommitted to the goal of the diversification of the faculty. The university continued to set aside strategic hiring initiative funding to provide incentives to departments to hire women in the sciences, engineering, minority faculty, and dual career couples. As Associate Vice Chancellor, with staff, I had the responsibility for these strategic hiring initiatives as well as the conduct of professional development workshops to prepare faculty leaders to recruit, retain, and advance women and minority faculty. These workshops emphasize emphasized the importance of the development of a positive department climate for the success of all faculty, but especially for the success of minority and women faculty. These workshops specifically charge department chairs and deans with the responsibility for fostering the success of these new entrants to the academy. Other workshops focused on faculty hiring processes, fair interview processes, best practices in recruitment, dual career couple recruitment strategies, and proactive orientation approaches. The key is that the chancellor and the provost ask deans and department chairs to take responsibility for increasing women and minority faculty, and also provided financial and technical support for that important activity. Other important policies and programs supported cultural change at the university. For example, the Committee on Women in the University, a faculty committee, advocated a policy to extend the permitted time to tenure for men and women who have children during the tenure probationary period. Sexual harassment also affected the climate and culture for success for women at the university. Chancellor Salela created a clear policy against sexual harassment in the university, and also a policy on consensual relationships between more powerful men and less powerful women to ensure that consensual relationships did not disadvantage women. In time, the Committee on Women agreed that the policy was valuable, but insisted that more be done to protect against sexual harassment. While I was Associate Vice Chancellor, I oversaw a campus-wide sexual harassment information project, which included information to every employee and student at the university. Remember, that's 43,000 students and 21 faculty and staff, about the policy against sexual harassment. The goal was to provide clear information about the reporting of sexual harassment and remedies for sexual harassment. In addition, I led a team that conducted campus-wide workshops to ensure that everyone understood sexual harassment, the harm it does to victims, and the harm that it renders to overall productivity and creativity. I'm going to shorten a bit. I'd like to talk briefly about one of the most important structural interventions at the University of Wisconsin, and which was the creation of a Women in Science and Engineering Leadership Institute, WISELY. WISELY started in 2002 after 2 women faculty members applied to the National Science Foundation for an institutional transformation grant to transform the role of women in the academic sciences. WISELY provides grants to promote its activities, workshops on a variety of topics, such as searching for excellence in diversity, assessing and enhancing department climate, breaking the bias habit, and other important topics. WISELY also provided a ready source of information on important policies for the attraction and retention and prosperity of women faculty, including gender pay equity studies, sexual harassment information resources, dual career couple, information benefits for parents, and other benefits. I'll turn now to talk about how our university has changed for women faculty. There are many other initiatives among them. I'd be happy to talk about them. Many other initiatives, including, of course, that commitment to the reevaluation of salary and also monitoring and intervention in the event that certain departments are unsuccessful in the recruitment, retention, and advancement of women. How has our university changed for women faculty? In a more extended format, I would discuss how our university has changed by looking at a wide range of numbers, as well as by using statistical analyses of qualitative data and anecdotal information. That comprehensive approach is beyond the scope of my project here, but I do want to make two particular observations. You might be curious to know how the university has changed with respect to the numbers of female faculty since Donna Shalala became chancellor until today. I decided to pull statistics from 2 years to make these comparisons. 1988, when she began her tenure, and 2013, the last year for which the university has compiled statistics. In 1988, there were 392 female faculty and 2,015 male faculty. In 2013, the last year for which we have full data, 714 were female and 1,475 male. As to full professors, our highest rank, whereas in 1998 there were 140 females, in 2013 we had 338 women at the highest rank at the university and 952 males. Finally, I will note how the university has changed with respect to the highest levels of administration. In the history of the University of Wisconsin-Madison since 1848, there have been 3 female chancellors, our highest level administrators. Chancellor Donna Shalala in 1988 through 1993. Chancellor Carolyn Martin from 2008 to 2011, also the first openly lesbian chancellor. And Chancellor Rebecca Blank from 2013 to the present. There has been just one woman to serve in the number 2 position, provost, who was appointed in 2014, and 2 women who served as interim provosts in the last 10 years. Finally, there have been women who have served as deans of the following major faculties: law, agriculture, pharmacy, education, nursing, and human ecology. One woman served as interim dean of the business school. There has never been a woman as the dean of the School of Medicine. The School of Business had an interim but not a permanent dean. No woman has been the dean of the School of Engineering, and no woman has been the dean of the School of Veterinary Medicine. That will come, yes. I will conclude. Sure. Every institution must tailor its processes to its own culture and ensure that women are not marginalized or stigmatized by its processes. There will be difficulties along the way and many challenges. But a simple beginning entails the following question: what do we want the role of women to be in our university in 20 years? The faculty we hire 20 years from now are in primary school today. What are you doing today to make your university a first choice for the girls as well as the boys? Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, for this wonderful presentation. And I didn't say it earlier, but thank you also for accepting my invitation when we organized this. So I'm very grateful, as you know. So now I would like, 5-minute questions maybe, and then we can move on to the workshops of the day. So are there any questions? And Mary, Gabe, maybe?
Professor Greene, thank you very much for your fantastic conference first thing. I just wanted to ask you if in France we have tried to tackle the issue of diversity in the workplace, and well, universities are a bit different because we recruit on competitive exams. And do you think that the principle, I mean for you who have researched that question, that competitive exams that are theoretically blind because we do not know the names of candidates or applicants, we don't know who they are, whether they're male or female or anything, do you think that it is biased or it may contribute to more diversity in academic circles?
I would not speak against competitive exams. Every institution, whether it's French or the United States, has a number of qualifications for participation which may or may not be job related. So I don't know about the exams. I'm sure they're fantastic. So assuming that they are fantastic, I can't assume otherwise. What is the university doing to prepare women to compete successfully on those exams? I didn't have the time to talk about our pipeline programs. Pipeline programs are programs in which institutions identify potential members of their community at very early stages of development. Some of these pipeline programs, for example, for women in the science and engineering, start in elementary school and in a process begin to educate women about the culture of discipline, which is as important as the knowledge that a discipline produces. So part of the challenge is making sure that people who have been historically excluded from the power networks that traditionally produce faculty members are included in those networks at earlier and earlier stages. And so part of that may have to do with where women attend university, and therefore what social, political, and other types of capital they have access to as they learn to compete. And so I won't take on the exam, but assuming that the exam does not itself embody bias, and that is an assumption, an exam may operate to exclude if people who compete do not have access to the networks that are necessary to prepare for and to understand the discipline's conventions. And so we have many pipeline programs to prepare women and minorities for university education, for education in the sciences. After all, our scientists believe that unless a young person in the 3rd grade or the 2nd grade is already involved with mathematical concepts and is developing, for example, mathematical literacy before the child is 6 or 7 years old, it may not be possible for that person, that young person, to compete, even though they might have the talent, the ability to compete. The nature of our social structure sometimes excludes women, minorities, people from those experiences that are as important to their preparation to compete as formal university education. So that's just a thought that I have. It's something for greater conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you. I have a question while you're taking the microphone. during your presentation, you said that there are different strategies for the inclusion of women. And one of them is announcing commitment. But how do you reach commitment, in fact? Because, I mean...
Yes, that's an excellent, yes. How did we reach commitment at the University of Wisconsin? I'll illustrate. A position as a university professor is an exercise of power. It's an exercise of intellectual power. And if women are to participate, it must be often the result of a change in the way in which the university distributes power. And so what happened at Wisconsin, a number of things. One thing that happened is that women faculty and male faculty and leaders who supported them became active in identifying concerns that thwarted the involvement of women and minorities at the university. The faculty senate appointed a committee of women and some men to identify those concerns. And that committee developed an ongoing process of dialogue with university leaders. That ongoing process of dialogue included a discussion of what makes search committees conduct fair processes. And the research demonstrates, and our experience demonstrated, that diverse search committees reach different conclusions about the quality of candidates than non-diverse search committees. And that's proven by research. And so that committee that selected Chancellor Shalala was more diverse than prior search committees. It's a committee constituted by the Board of Regents, but it did have women on it. The chair of the Board of Regents at that time was a black man who was the chief executive of a major energy company. And he was a proponent of diversity in his corporate life. And so a number of circumstances came together to create a transformational opportunity. And with Donna Shalala, who was a woman with not only experience as an academic, but experience in politics, understood the importance of politics and the strategic uses of power. And so many factors came together to create a transformational moment in which the chancellor was able to make commitments. There still are men, well, most of them have retired, but there were men on our faculty who actually shivered every time we mentioned the name of Chancellor Shalala. Because she not only fired our American football coach and our American basketball coach to hire new coaches who had winning records, she also made it clear to the faculty leadership that there will be women leaders and there will be women and minority faculty. And she put her money where her mouth was. And people respond to incentives. And so there's so many, I agree, it's a really great question because these things don't happen. Transformational opportunities must be created and we must take advantage of them when they exist. So it's not, we're not talking about a passive approach.
And a last question maybe?
Right, quickly. Well, it's very interesting to compare processes, which is what we're speaking about for how these things occur, transformation. Within the US context, would you say what you've been describing is an example of affirmative action? Would it be, are these the terms, is this the term that would be used for this?
I consider that a polemic and negative term and I never use it.
Okay.
I call it effective measures for inclusion.
And just comment on reaction to this. You said that some of the men shivered. Could you comment on reaction to this? Do people, how is it visible?
It's changed. It's changed what fathers think about when they are thinking about where to send their daughters to the university. The fact that it's a university with female department chairs, the fact that it's a university with female deans, the fact that it's a university with female faculty in all disciplines has made a difference in how the state and the nation perceives our university. We are thought of as a place where women and minorities are able to succeed, and that in turn affects our ability to recruit all over the world. Just so much research out there. One research developing now demonstrates that actually younger male faculty are less satisfied with their departmental environments when they are non-diverse, that they are less confident in the decision-making of their leaders when they see no diversity. And so people are beginning to study in a rigorous and systematic way what difference diversity makes. It doesn't mean that everyone will embrace diversity, but where there are incentives, rewards provided to pursue the policies, then it's possible that people will see it in a self-interest to become involved. And as I said, I would end just by saying that the strong, unequivocal leadership support for diversity is a necessary but insufficient basis for institutional transformation. Resources, strategies for cultural change, programs, etc. must be formalized. People know a university is serious when money follows policy.
I have a very last question because we are already running late as usual. So I don't know, well, you talked of the faculty, but in terms of the results of the students, does diversity change anything? I mean, do black students have better results when they are in a diverse environment or in an exclusively black university like Howard or what do you know? Do you have any? Do I have any statistics on that, or does that change the results for their level for success?
You're asking a lot of questions.
Yeah, I know.
Well, let me just say that.
We'll talk more.
Yes, we can talk more.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there are multiple environments in which students are able to thrive, and one of the important attributes of an environment that permits female students to thrive and minority students to thrive is an environment in which there are diverse faculty so that they see themselves in the intellectual work of the university. And
so they take that as role models?
Role models is a part of the rationale, but it's broader than that.
Okay,
Yes.
we'll talk.
Yes.
Okay.
A lot more to talk about. This discussion will go on, as Frederick Douglass said.
Thank you very much.
Thank
again.
you.